make sure that they're thinking, you'll be better positioned to be reelected if you take care of people. We have to understand how that whole machine works. I'm open for anybody else who has a comment on that or any other thing.
Similar to what Jenny said, a lot of times you think that you're not part of the problem, but if you're not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. But it's easy for, on social media, the right things. On blackout day, you put the blank screen on, you like certain posts, you retweet them, but it's not enough. What you said about speaking out and using your voice makes a lot of sense. I sometimes get caught up in this fake news cycle where I'm trying to convince people who are trying to spin stories or draw comparisons that aren't at all fair. I'm wasting some of my time trying to persuade those people, and I'm not so sure that that's as good of a use of time as some of the things that you've mentioned here. When you get in a dialogue with someone who is spinning and who's trying to deflect, it's not only you having the conversation with that individual, but it's a bunch of other people who are watching that conversation from the outside. There are two individuals that I know who have had those types of conversations, and they carried the conversation through, and I was able to see what their perspectives were. That's an important thing because it's dialogue that we're not going to get through the news. And it's dialogue that real people are having with real people in that situation. As you participating in that conversation, do your best to persuade them, being respectful, and then the other person will demonstrate their perspective. And you never know if you've influenced them to shift, but if somebody else who might be listening in might have a shift in perspective because they heard this other person and saying, his argument makes no sense at all. So somebody else may shift as a result of your conversation. And when it no longer feels useful, I would stop and move on. Right. If the other person gets belligerent, I move on. If the other person gets to the point where they are just really not making any sense, I stop, I move on.
I think what we're really talking about is listening to other people's perspective and learning from it, and then having discussions with it. The things that I feel like I'm doing are putting things out there, especially on social media, because this is the first time I've ever felt like there was a voice for all of us equally out on social media. I know that there are people that are listening and not commenting. I'm still compelled to make those comments and bring forward things. One of the things that I was so surprised about from following other people was the example of the Black parents talking to their children about how you have to behave because you're Black.
Yeah, that's why I suggested the movie Mudbound. Of all the movies that I've seen, that one covers the spectrum of what the perceptions are. Anybody else want to talk about what they would do? Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, so Russ, I really appreciate your eloquence on this subject. I'm feeling a lot of anger right now from me being a DC insider inside the Beltway and all that to hold the pieces together because, you know, I have to be very politically correct. So sometimes I have to check myself and say, hey, what can I do for myself to keep you know, peaceful or keep in the loop or let my thoughts not go awry. So I went to a protest, believe it or not, on Wednesday. And I didn't know what to expect. And I'll tell you what I got. And this will be interesting to all of you. I got out of my truck. I looked at the crowd and I sat down on a curb and I started bawling. I started crying. I could not hold the tears in. And someone came up to me and they said, hey, are you okay? And I said, I'm good. And they offered me some water, which would only produce more tears for me probably. But anyway, and I cried for probably 10 minutes. I couldn't stop. It was uncontrollable. And the reason I cried, and I share this with people, so maybe it helps, is that I was so happy to see people of every color, all ages, all that. And it almost gave me the point where I said, wow, I don't even have to do anything, but just show up. I don't have to say anything, right? And so I followed the crowd along the parade route. There were cool police officers I talked to. It was just like everybody was singing Kumbaya, right? It's great to see that when we're uncomfortable, people banding together. Then when we get comfortable, right? So I got back into my neighborhood and I might live in a pretty good neighborhood. The conversations changed. And it was like, hey, you guys are doing this, or you guys are doing, And then the anger started up again. Hey, wait, you're not understanding what's going on here. It's really not a race issue, even, to be honest with you. And so I have to go through that conversation again, Russ. And thank you, because I believe that I precipitated a lot of the tools that you've been incorporating, that you had just mentioned. And then, ironically, it's funny, as I was coming to work today, which is just getting to a good internet connection these days, someone said something to me and came right at me and made some comments. And I said, hey, I'm not having this conversation with you. As I felt the anger start, there was nothing good that was going to come out of the conversation. And I could tell the person I was talking to was an antagonist, right? And I walked away. With a little bit of anger. If I had that conversation, it could have escalated potentially. So it's taking care of yourself. And just like you said, sometimes you don't need to say anything. And sometimes you do. And there have been other folks that have come to me and said, hey, I really want to know what's going on and how you feel, what can be done, what are the solutions. And it's not a one size fits all, right? But one of the things that I do say is just you coming out and saying, what can we do? Or how can we get through this together? I'm not making a political speech, but that's the America that I love and that I fall in love with. I fall in love with the America that we can have two differences of opinion, and we can sit down and I can give you my view, you can give me your view, and I walk away from that conversation saying, wow, I never really thought of it that way. And I might incorporate that into my thinking, or hopefully it goes the same way. I had a lot of conversations like that when I was overseas in Europe, specifically in Paris. I could be at a venue all night and we're yelling passionately about the way we feel about things. But the passion was, we allowed each other's passion, but we didn't take it the wrong way. And there was no finger pointing. And afterward, we all hugged. I felt so good walking away from those conversations, even though the other person didn't agree with me. If there was one thing that I could get, Joan Rivers, can we talk? Can we talk? Just can we talk, right? Whatever it is, can we talk? If we can get back to that, that's the America that I love, because if we can have these conversations and we can have these difficult conversations and people start to align and realize maybe not what the country stood for, because I think we're warmongers, by the way, but the country was built on, violence, right? But the whole thought of the Constitution and all of that was that we're happy, that we get along, and we're in the pursuit of happiness, right? Religious freedom, all of these things. Can we get back to the dream of what our country has stood for and what we want, and not let everything else get back into business as usual and us getting comfortable? So that's my take.
So, that is, those are some very, very, very powerful points. The one that you mentioned that I didn't have on this list was show up. Sometimes just show up, just be present. It makes a very visible image and picture that there are more than one perspective. And you saw the pictures of people in Denmark who were demonstrating, and you see this big crowd, and you go back to the Million Man marches and all those things. It just required people to show up. So we're at 1:30. I knew this was going to go fast. I had hoped to take less time and have more engagement and conversation, but I definitely appreciate the input. I really do want you to see that you don't have to try to be heroic and you don't have to try to be super visible, but just some of those little things that you think are not making a difference or not having an impact are really having an impact, and be comfortable in what you do most naturally in terms of engaging and being authentic. That's where we need to go, because if we do feel confident and comfortable we're making a decision impact, we will do that more frequently. And then that will begin to have impact over the long run.
Russ, I really appreciate you bringing all this together for us. And I think what we're all saying is, let's listen to each other. Let's express our views. Let's reach out to other people, get comfortable being uncomfortable. I know in my personal case, I've been very reluctant to discuss this with my family because I don't want it to turn into a political thing. It's important to reach out to people that I've never had a discussion with on race, and on my responsibility as an American to make sure that I'm doing my part to talk about it. Showing up is number one. So thank you all very much for being here today. I really appreciate it. I'm going to be posting this out to YouTube and some other places. If you've got any other thoughts, reach out to me on LinkedIn or personally. If you see things on LinkedIn to be shared, message me. Sometimes I can say things that are more comfortable for me to say because I'm not in a bigger organization, and I'm happy to continue that conversation. Anything else to add, Russ?
I want to say this thing we really can focus on is this systemic and institutional aspects of this challenge rather than the interpersonal aspects of the challenge. You know, we really can have an impact on doing something about institutional things that are in place. And if we do that, then I think that we'll be able to grow through some of the other things that need to happen.
I think that's a really good point to address it from a socioeconomic standpoint and what our country's come to. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Have a great Friday, and we'll see you next week.